Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi. Today's review, we're going to be looking at a privacy notice. This one was last updated June 27, 2025. Now, generally during my reviews, I spend a lot of time in the introduction because the introduction sets the tone and setting for all of the other provisions that we see. What's generally placed in an introduction is the scope of the notice. Anytime a business outlines what the scope is, that influences the type of data that's collected. That influences how the data is used. That influences the third parties to whom the data is shared. That influences the rights and choices and obligations that a business has with respect to the data they collect. Every single decision and provision flows from this introduction, which is why it's really important for businesses to dictate the scope of services. And we can see here that this organization has listed what's in scope for this notice. Now, the reason that's important is because there's different buckets of data subjects. There are data subjects that are consumers of your business's products. There are data subjects that are your employees of your business. There are data subjects that are candidates applying for a job. There are vendors and suppliers that you liaise with in order to facilitate the services you provide. There are different buckets and there are different uses and there are different types of personal data you collect based on the bucket or activity that you are conducting. And that needs to be provided within the notice, which is why it's very important to outline the scope. Now we're looking at the scope here. The scope of this particular notice is using our website, which I'm using. So this applies to me. I'm using this website because I'm on it right now and I'm reviewing their notice. It also applies to anybody that uses the mobile sites, applications, online products, and subscribes to the print newsletter or online publications. Now I see here that that's the services of this organization. So if you are consuming any of these print newspapers or online publications, this notice also applies to you. We can see that this does not apply to employees of this organization. So that will influence the type of data that's collected. That's going to influence how they use the data too. If this notice was Dow Jones Employee Privacy Notice, it will influence the type of data that is collected. It will influence how they use the data they obtain. There is different responsibilities associated with the bucket of data subjects that a privacy notice is applicable to. So now that we know the scope, let's look at the data. So this also influences the data that's provided to an organization. Now there's a principle in the data protection space known as something called data minimization. And data minimization dictates that you should only collect the data minimally required to conduct a processing activity. So in the provision of these services, if an organization doesn't need to collect your social security number in order for you to attend their conference or event, they should not be collecting it under the principle of data minimization. That's what that means, okay? So in reading this, if I see social security number as a privacy lawyer, I'm going to query it because based on my review of what's in scope, there is nothing here that tells me that there should be processing of social security number based on what's in scope, which is again going back to what I said about how everything related to a notice flows from the introduction. The other thing that I'll say about that sentence is this is why I think it's very valuable to have a privacy lawyer review what it is that your business is doing, because they can give you insights into that. They can give you insights into what it is that you're collecting. Now, I'll tell you something that's been happening recently related to technology. What's happening is sometimes people have technical tools or applications that they utilize that inadvertently collect more personal data than is required. So what happens is sometimes businesses will liaise with a third party. That third party will help them in providing their product or service to the customer. But what's happened is because the business didn't do due diligence, they don't know that their third-party provider is actually collecting more personal data than is required for their products and services. And it's a business's responsibility, the controller, to do their due diligence to see what's actually in scope. That's not the responsibility of the third party. That's the responsibility of business A. And I mentioned that because if you're listing on your website that there's certain personal data and identifiers that are being collected in relation to your services, but actually there's more personal data that you don't know about, that won't absolve you of responsibility in the event of an investigation with a regulator. I want to talk about data collected by automated means through the service. So in some geographies, there are certain data identifiers that would not qualify to be collected through automated means because there's something that would be required first prior to the collection of certain data identifiers. For example, if you look at the US state privacy laws, you'll see that the definition of what constitutes sensitive data varies state to state. In some geographies, you'll see sensitive data includes citizenship data, data about your citizenship. Sometimes it includes data related to your immigration status, but that's not the same in other states. Some states consider precise geolocation data to be a sensitive data identifier. Now, the reason that's important, and I've highlighted this sentence, is because you wouldn't be able to collect those identifiers through automated means because you have to obtain consent prior to the collection of certain sensitive data identifiers. So when I do a review for my clients and I look through data that's collected by automated means, I should not be seeing any identifier that is considered sensitive because prior to processing any sensitive data, you need to obtain consent. And automated means it's being collected automatically. I'm interacting with this site right now, so my IP address has been collected by this organization. So has my device information. So has my viewing behavior. If I click investment data, corporate research, risk management, that's information that's being fed back to this organization. And they're able to identify me, Funmi Owolabi, based on this information, which is why it constitutes personal data. If I saw data collected by automated means and I saw social security number here, that would be non-compliant with what data protection laws in the United States require because you need to obtain consent prior to collecting that type of information. So I think that's really important for businesses to know. Really take a look at what it is that you're listing on your website for many different reasons. One, so you can comply with the law. But two, make sure that it's consistent with what's required in every geography where you provide your products and services. Let's say, for example, somebody obtains an online publication and they're located in California. There are privacy laws that dictate what this business must do with respect to the personal data of that California resident. Those obligations may differ to individual who purchases the online publication in Maryland. There are privacy laws in Maryland that dictate how personal data can be processed on residents there that differ to the obligations in California and a California resident's personal data. And your business is required under the law to know, one, whether you meet the threshold, and two, to adhere to the obligations in that geography. So you need to be able to understand the law and you need to reconcile your privacy program to address your obligations based on the residents whose personal data you process. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments about what I've stated, leave a comment below and I'll see you in another review.